Recording has started.
Okay. So I don't know if everyone's had a chance to pick up that one pager on Feeney. I think there was a printout at the front table, but if you haven't, um, well, there's still more over here. I actually don't have the one pager. But the basics of the Feeney grant, the Food Insecurity Nutrition Incentive that I referred to before, and I feel bad. I don't know that we have an electronic copy up for everyone on the webinar of the one pager, but you can certainly go online to find, if you Google Feeney, you'll probably find a link to the USDA website or to other sources that outline it. But there's 4 years of RFPs for Feeney, and because it's a 5-year farm bill and we're already 1 year in so that's why there are only 4. So we're currently in this piece, or the first funding round, which is going to be a little over $31 million for the country. It doesn't sound like it's a lot of money for the whole country to share, but it actually, you think about it, and most of the programs that are around the country are fairly new to doing incentives. There's not a lot of programs that are at the scale of what we have going on in Michigan, and so I actually think fingers crossed, there will be plenty of funds for the different efforts around the state. Since part of what is required out of Feeney is a 1-to-1 match of local funds for every federal dollar that's brought in. And that match can be in the form of cash coming from, whether it's coming from any kind of cash that you fundraise, or in-kind efforts that go towards the program implementation related to that, the double up activity. And so if markets are staffing a table at the market and running a double up program, those hours can be counted at an hourly rate, whether it's volunteers or paid staff. And so obviously if it's paid staff, you have a good sense of how much they're being paid. If it's a volunteer, you would pay them at whatever comparable rate, or you would not pay them, but you would list out that number. And so what we've been using is around $12 an hour. The federal standard for volunteers is $22, but then this Feeney application specifically said you can only use something that is what you would pay someone to be standing at the table. So you can't use the $22 rate. Anywho, it adds up to a lot if you go and look over the course of the entire market season at all the different markets where there's all this swiping happening. And that's certainly activity that's related to the Feeney grant. And I don't know, that's probably the largest chunk of in-kind support that can come from the individual markets. And any market that is part of an application would probably be asked to quantify how many hours per week that is and multiply it times that hourly rate and get to the total of what the in-kind contribution would be per year. And then any of those dollars would potentially bring in, a matching federal dollar that could be used on incentives. So I don't know, how much to go into the details here. There will be applications coming out for the next couple of years. Nonprofits have to be the lead agency on an application, although certainly there can be partners on the grant that are for-profit. And government agencies can also apply. But in most cases, government agencies are not the applicant because of some of the challenges of getting money dispersed to the partner agencies throughout the program. And there is a requirement that the agency that is the lead applicant should not be subcontracting more than 50% of the work. So that again puts it's best for the lead applicant to be an organization that is in pretty good contact with the farmers markets that are ultimately going to be implementing the program, rather than them regrant. You can get a waiver to regrant to another organization, but it just means asking for a waiver. Trying to think of, from what we've talked about with, in the time I've had with Martin this morning and also on the phone before, it seems like CFA, and I feel awkward, I'm speaking for him right now, but CFA is interested in putting in an application for markets in Kentucky, including some of the markets that they work with already through that farmers market support program in Eastern Kentucky, and also, they are working with some of the markets in Louisville on SNAP acceptance and other, technical assistance around that. So that seems like a very easy fit for them in looking to see who would be part of their umbrella. I think there's also interest in seeing what other markets are around the state that are interested in doing incentives. Maybe some are already doing incentives like Bowling Green, and if they wanted to be part of a Feeney application that was part of the collaboration, I think Martin is open to that at this point. The big limiting factor for the discussion is, what is the amount of match that can be raised, and how does that balance against the need in terms of the dollars being spent at the markets? And so there's there's 3 levels of Feeney grants. One is for a 1-year pilot that is capped at $100,000 in award. The second is between $100,000 and $500,000, and it's a multi-year, anywhere between 2 and 4 years you can apply for. And then the third category is a large-scale project, which is for programs that have some established track record. It's over $500,000. There's no cap on what you can request, and it's over 2 to 4 years as well. And it's to do, innovative things with much more rigorous evaluation requirements than the other 2 projects. And so Martin was talking about the CFA application would be in the middle of that range. And so somewhere between $100,000 and $500,000 requested from the Feeney program, which would then have to be matched by that equivalent amount, $100,000 to $500,000 worth of cash and in-kind support. And so we were doing some of the numbers before and seeing where some of the mix of funders who have provided for the program in the past, the mix of what markets have contributed towards the program in terms of in-kind support and cash match for some of the pilot programs that have run this past year, and trying to get a sense of where this would all add up to. And that, again, would, every market that would participate, I think, there would be an expectation definitely of there being an in-kind contribution, but also the question was how much the cash contribution would look like if, or what that would look like in the end, in order to make sure that there was ultimately enough federal money coming in so that there were incentives for everyone. I guess one other clarifying thing is that unlike the Double Dollars program has been structured, Feeney is much more specific about the type of incentive that it targets. So the dollars coming through Feeney are specifically for SNAP. It's much more like the Double Up program. And so any dollars that are committed and matched would be used for fruits and vegetables only as the incentive at the point of sale, at the farmer's market, to incentivize SNAP purchases. And the goal of Feeney is really around increasing purchases of fruits and vegetables among SNAP participants. So it's not about WIC, it's not about senior coupons, it's not about other items that might be at the market besides fruits and vegetables. The fruits and vegetables can be canned, they can be frozen, they can be fresh. They don't have to be locally grown, although there is a preference for locally grown in the application. So you get points for having it be at a farmer's market where it's locally grown. It's not saying that it's restricted to that. But so that's a little bit of a different structure and direction than the Double Dollars pilot has been, but this is an opportunity that could potentially, leverage the funding that could be brought to the table to bring in a whole lot more funding. And I think what we've seen with the Double Up program as it works at markets, customers have their SNAP tokens that they can use at any vendor, again, that's not a prepared food vendor at the market. And they have the Double Up tokens that are just fruits and vegetables. And so they figure it out over time, similar to how everyone figures out how these token programs work. And so they wind up budgeting where they use their SNAP tokens on items like bread, cheese, meat, things that you couldn't use the SNAP or the Double Up tokens for, as they learn what each one is for. So I know that there might be some hesitation. I know from other conversations I've had in other places there are market programs that are, it just doubles everything at the market when there's a doubling program. That's not going to work for the purposes of the Feeney funds, and so I don't know if that's a discussion or what. But there's no flexibility if you wanted to work with the Feeney program on that front. But I also like that anecdote was just to say that vendors that are not doing produce at the market still usually see benefits from the Double Up program. We had, when I was at a market in Tulsa recently, there was a bakery that sells at the market, and they were saying that since they instituted the Double Up program at this market, his SNAP sales, which he was ready to pull out of the market, and he saw SNAP sales increasing every single week at that market, and now it makes up about 10% of the sales at his market, for his bakery at that market, and that 10% is enough to make it worthwhile to pay the person to be at the market every week. So that was a really nice story to hear, because I think, and it was helpful to be able to show that, I'm sure it doesn't work the same way in every place, but there are customers adapt, and there's also a benefit to all the vendors. But the main purpose of the program is around fruit and vegetable purchasing, and particularly from a nutrition angle, not from a local economic development angle, for the purposes of this grant. So while we talked about the win-win-win, Feeney doesn't really go into impact on farmers and local economy, even though clearly it gives priority to local and will have a huge benefit in that way. For the purposes of writing the grant, it's a funny thing, because around the table, everyone who has like the local farmers economic development cap on, it's just a little bit of a different way of writing this grant, even though I'm sure, I think we all feel passionately about that part of that, and that's a really important part of why the incentives are so, why they're so good to implement. So those are a couple of things to highlight. Kentucky, and particularly areas, I guess, outside of Louisville that are promise zone, strike force counties, are also given priority in the grant application. And so USDA is trying to align their various programming, especially on, through the nutrition lens, where they have metrics on areas that have high food insecurity, and are trying to make sure that the programs like Feeney are targeted towards those areas as much as possible. And so you get extra points, I guess, in the review. Yeah.
One of the promise zones or strike force counties, is that USDA considered as a food desert?
It's a different designation, but I'm sure there's overlap in many places between the two. Alita, do you know the exact definition, or Martin, of?
I just looked.
So yeah, so I guess to review, we have the webinar folks too, who I don't know how much you could hear, but a lot of the southeastern part of the state and also the more rural areas qualify as either promise zone or strike force. So I think, yeah, it's not a perfect designation. It's on the USDA website. If it's something you Google, you'll see what comes up. But Owen Martin has that information as well that he can provide. But it's certainly, it's another priority that they have for this application.
I think to make that clear, to make it clear, it has to do with priority in the application. It doesn't mean it eliminates those places from it, right? So that doesn't mean that Boyle County couldn't be part of it, right?
And then the other, for Feeney, there's an emphasis on not only the program funding incentives at markets, or funding incentives for fruits and vegetables by SNAP consumers, but also evaluating that, because this is the first time it's been in the Farm Bill, and they want to make sure that this money is being well utilized and see, that it's working well in all the areas that they're trying it out. So there's, a project self-evaluation, so that every market, similar to what would happen even if there wasn't Feeney, has to record the number of SNAP transactions that happened over the course of the day, the number of dollars that were spent, and then so you have the dollars of SNAP, the dollars of Double Up that were spent, all those different pieces just recorded, so that the market is not only tracking for their own finances, but also sharing with the organization that's applying to USDA for a self-evaluation, and then a lot of that data gets shared with an independent evaluator to be selected by USDA in the end. So it's just, it's standard record keeping that I'm sure that was probably part of what you required for these initial grants, and it's a simple spreadsheet that you would have at the market. The machine usually prints out totals at the end of the day, or it's not meant to be that much of a burden, but it's one more step.
The government's involved.
So there's that, and I guess the deadline for Feeney is December 15th, which is a little over a month away. And so for markets that are participating and are contributing in kind, there would again need to be a letter of commitment for that. If there was money being contributed, that's a letter of pledge, and that's whether it's from a market or whether that's from a funder, something saying that for the period of the grant, and that would be, I guess we're thinking it would start April or May of 2015, and run then, the next year would be April or May of 2016. And so we were talking about whether it's like a 2 or 3 year grant, depending on the funds that could be raised. So the funder would have to make explicit that they would commit that over that 2 or 3 year period, they would provide X number of dollars per year. And they don't need to, the markets and the funders of the project don't need to literally write the check December 15th, but they have to have the funds committed for that period. They, in fact, for year 2 funds, those don't need to be in the bank for that first year either. It would come up for discussion when the year 2 starts, and the USDA would say, okay, we're going to write you another check for year 2. Like, can you confirm that you have your funds together for year 2? So that's, those are the sorts of pieces that have to come together, and then, which markets actually want to apply, and which, I think there would be letters of support from partners that are not necessarily doing the activity of implementing Double Up at the markets, but are, whether it's state agencies like the SNAP agency in the state has to write a letter of support according to the guidelines of Feeney, but also, from any other state agency, from food banks that would be interested, or the Food Bank Association. Tamara, you mentioned as well, and she and I had a really nice conversation the other day. So getting those partners just to say, we're all in support of this program being more widely available at more markets, is a general good thing for the application. So, there's so many details with the Feeney application that I could go into, but that's the gist of it. I don't know if there are questions about that. I should also mention, farmers markets can be a site for this, but it also could happen through other direct mechanisms like, farm stands, where there might be a single farmer selling directly to consumers. Those could be a site for these incentives. You could also have CSAs working with incentives, and we talked about an example in Louisville. So if people were purchasing these CSAs with SNAP, they could have part of that CSA essentially be incentivized. And it sounds like there are incentives already happening through that program in Louisville, but those incentives could count as match if it was written down in a letter, and then receive more federal funds for match. And it actually the grant is open to retailers as well. And so grocery stores, and this is that brave new world with grocery stores, could apply and put in an incentive application. And it's I don't think many retailers are able to do that on their own because they're for profit for the most part. But it is a possibility out there. And again, it's tricky to implement, but a couple people are trying it. And so those are the scope of things. For the purposes of what CFA is thinking about, I know we've talked about farmers markets. I don't know if you've thought about how like a CSA project in Louisville would fit in, or I think it's a question in some ways of gathering who the interested markets are, and once that list is together, having a sense of what the budget appropriate for that would be, and if the match can be there for that point. Getting the funds together for a Feeney application, let's say for 2 years, doesn't restrict you from getting more funds over the course of those years outside of Feeney that would enable you to, let's say you're doing really well with incentives and run out of the Feeney funding, you could definitely continue to raise funds, and it's a good idea to continue to share what the evaluation results are from the first year and talk to funders about how impactful the program is hopefully being, and then get more funds, whether together for another Feeney application 2 years later. You'd be eligible to apply, we think, again, or just in general, there might be some things that Feeney wouldn't cover, such as, pretty much anything not related to the incentive part of the work, but that are still important to making the farmers markets, well greased and running smoothly. And so you can maybe get funding from other sources for that sort of thing. Did you have a question or no? Okay. Yeah.
I got a couple of questions. So one is that the funds that are available are to be spent specifically for double dollars and for SNAP to be able to get food to SNAP recipients. Is that correct? So I'm not sure. Our little market is just getting started with our SNAP benefits and that sort of thing. So we probably couldn't qualify for, with these priorities here to be able to even apply for this Feeney grant. The main thing we're looking for is maybe a manager. So I guess, Martin, this question's for you. If you all apply, is that going to in turn help our little market? If you all apply for the funds and...
Do you want to explain how that would work? Do you want me to explain?
Yeah, so Noah's been very helpful, and not only Noah, but just other conversations try to figure this all out, right? Excuse me. So, I think that in for instance, a 2-year grant application by CFA anyway, that it probably makes sense that those markets who are already capable of taking SNAP with EBT could easily be participating in a double up program through Feeney, right? And just that part. And meanwhile, over the course of the first year, working with other markets to help them get ready, right? And in fact, that's what happened this year with both Berea and Letcher counties and Metcalfe County too, right? Unfortunately, it took them almost a full season to finally get it all kind of in place. So they're ready to go this year, right? For other markets like yours, for instance, it may take a year to get that up, right? Our intention, I think you may or may not be clear, is so the Feeney grant is only covering SNAP, and it's only for fruit and vegetables, right? Our intention is still to provide a double dollars program like we did last year that encompasses SNAP, WIC, and seniors. So those funds would have to come from another source, not through the Feeney, right? And I am working on that, right? Working to reach out to past partners. Karen and I are talking, as is the other folks, to see what we can put together for a double dollars program. So that may mean that a market such as yours could potentially be part of the double dollars program. You're just not going to be able to do it for SNAP, right? Does that make sense? And then, of course, we know the key to all this is having a market manager, right? Because it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do any kind of double dollar incentive program if you don't have anybody to run the thing, right? because every farmer is busy, doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, potentially, a volunteer could do it, which is the other part about, being able to take SNAP and EBT. I mean, one of the challenges you saw up there is in order to take SNAP EBT is there has to be someone's name assigned to it, and then the federal government requires an identification number. If it's an individual, it's a Social Security number, which few people are willing to do, which comes back to why a good reason for a market to be incorporated, under one of the different scenarios, because then you become a federally recognized, legal entity, and that number, in fact, is the number you would then use for EBT. Clear as mud? Yes. Personally, I don't have a problem. Alita could probably talk better because that is a common question that the K card gets to deal with more than me. Is like, what's the best options? Because there is LLC. I know there's LLC, co-ops, nonprofits. From my point of view, I don't care as long as you take those steps. Yeah.
So I'm from WellCare, and we funded CFA this year, and then some other markets around the state. And I just want to encourage you, even if you don't have a lot of SNAP transactions now, what we saw in the data, because especially with Berea, we funded them on a different program, and so we had like a month to month, and they were, I think, a first year of having the EBT and SNAP availability, and for the first few months, they just had between 2 and 6 SNAP transactions. And then by July, when the Double Dollars program started, it went up to 100, and then 150, and then, and so, I mean, to go from 2 to 6 to, between 100 and 150 SNAP transactions, I thought was huge. And so even though you may be a small market, I want to encourage you that the Double Dollars programs really make a huge difference.
I don't know. Was there anything else other questions or webinar questions or?
Yeah, why don't you read it, Noah?
Okay.
I think I've been able to answer some of them, but there's this last one here.
Okay. So how would that work at a farmer market where SNAP participants get their SNAP tokens upfront without having picked up their items yet? Usually they get Double Dollars right away without the farmer's market knowing if they are going to then spend their SNAP tokens on meat or veggies. So that was so is that in reference to how the tokens would work in general, or am I missing?
So you might better explain, the markets you've worked with, that you have the SNAP double on
Okay.
tokens. And so if I am a SNAP participant and I come to the market, how does it work?
Right, and so typically, I see. And so if you have different double currencies, so the way that it works, and I'll start, I guess, with, I'll start with Michigan, because anyway. You go to the farmer's market, you swipe your EBT card at the farmer's market central table for the most part, and you'll get, let's say you take out $10 off your EBT card, you'll get $10 of tokens for SNAP. And again, those tokens are, let's say they're wooden tokens, and they can be used at any of the SNAP eligible vendors. And then you also, at the same exact moment, get $10 of the silver tokens that I passed around before. and they can be only used for fresh fruits and vegetables. So that's with two different kinds of currencies. And when you begin to add different types of restrictions, then you have to add different types of tokens. And in some cases, if you think about WIC, and if it's on a coupon voucher here, that's essentially another kind of currency that people have, and it has its own restrictions, again, on fresh fruits and vegetables. Senior farmers market coupons are a different kind of currency. They're just not a coin again, they're a voucher. And so if you're thinking about, double dollars, it sounds like, from what I understand, can be used on, if you use your WIC coupon, the double dollar part can actually be used on anything at the farmer's market, correct? Or is it restricted to WIC? So you have a separate one. So maybe I don't understand how the double dollars work. If someone brought their WIC coupon to the central table to get, or no, they brought it to the farmer. That's how they spend the WIC coupon. But then the doubling happens where it's still restricted to, yes, you should explain this one. Because, Double Up pretty much works with token-based systems, and that's where, or electronic systems, but not with, like with a coupon system. If we were implementing it in the Double Up way, I would say they would bring the WIC coupon to like a table where they would then get a token, essentially, to double it as another tangible thing. But here, I guess it depends on the restrictions you want, and you have a different way of doing it.
Right, and the WIC is for the fruits and vegetables only, and they take their voucher to the grower and decide which increment that they're going to use, whether it's 4, 8, however much there, and then the grower provides twice the amount that they spend. So again, if they use their whole $20, then the farmer gives $40 worth of produce back, and then at the end of the day, they get their check. They just say, I have 6 checks, so we know that we write them a check for that much. Am I answering the question?
Yeah, for some reason, yeah. And so my point of confusion was, I thought that the double dollars could be used for other items at the market, but it's restricted to whatever. So if they use the senior farmers market coupon with a farmer, then it's restricted, but just to the senior farmers market items, like we were talking about how you could use. Yeah. Okay. So it keeps the currency restrictions the same. Okay. Yeah.
Like if a grower has 10 checks that are $40, then we just write them a check out for $40. So the grower is able to sell twice as much produce. The customer gets to eat twice the produce. Our market grows.
So the funding again for that would have to come from a separate stream, and it sounds simpler to not have another token involved in that process. There are markets that are out there and doing doubling of SNAP and WIC and senior farmers market coupons with tokens, and there are different there's every color of the rainbow of tokens. So anyway. Would you want to elaborate on that, or is that an aside?
Well,
Okay. Then maybe that's more confusing. Okay.
All you say, that's why they call it a pilot, right?
Yes, that's why they call it a pilot. So, did that help with the question? Or I guess it seems like that.
I think it helped.
Okay.
Responded.
Okay. So yeah, that's the gist of FINI. And again, from what it sounded like in response to your question, CFA would be willing to be the umbrella applicant, because I think not only in terms of the structure of the market or the capacity, the grant is fairly complicated to write. If anyone has experience with like a community food projects grant or beginning farmer and rancher development program grant, it's out of the same branch of USDA, and they have there's just a lot of pieces they want put together in a really nice way. Alita's shaking her head. I spent a 3-day retreat with another group writing a FINI grant, and it's like, whoa, there's still so much to go. But it was good. It helped all the ideas really solidify, and their application was more complicated because they're a little bit further along in terms of developing a network of farmers markets in a different state. So I think there's a lot of great potential here, and I think it would be like a great service for markets that don't have the individual capacity to write the grant, to have an umbrella application, not to mention that the collaboration would allow for more regional consistency. So like when we were talking about how the evaluation turns out, how the communications materials could be shared, those sorts of things, it all would come together.
I want to add on that point is, if you're a market, if you're a market that wants to put together an application, then it is going to be a time commitment. I would say 80 to 120 hours in the next month. We are happy to help. We help grant applicants, and we are happy to help on federal grant applications. And we've started working with some folks to try to help them. But it is just one of those, federal grants are bears. And so, and we'll help you break it down, and we'll help you sort of break apart the pieces, but just know that. And so, especially if you are not applying for much money, you start to wonder, is this worth it? And this is before you get the thing. And once you get it, there's a lot of, paperwork on that end too. So I do think it makes a lot of sense to try to think about how to collaborate and really pull together so that not everybody is spending those 80 to 120 hours. And maybe you can come up with a cohesive approach. Again, if anybody wants to work on an individual grant, we're happy to help. We'll do what we can, but it is a bear. And you cannot, these are not the type of grants you can wait until the last minute and do a cram session for. It just is. So anyway, that's my pitch.
Well, and so I guess the other, like in terms of an action item, I think that the rest of the time here, if there are markets, I don't know if there's a way to quantify the amount of in-kind supporters, start to think about that. And I think there would have to be a draft of a letter of commitment, support, and pledge that would be able to go out for you to put that information into. But just getting a sense from the markets that are around the table or on the webinar, if they're interested in being part of the CFA FINI application, having like that next step of, how much time would it involve to run a doubling program at the market in terms of the time that probably the hours of your market proper, how many weeks the market runs for. I would say every week it would probably be an hour of record keeping time. Let's put it in there as an hour of record keeping time, another hour between like setup and taking down the booth. Like those sort of like adding up, like what are the hours entailed? There's probably going to be a couple of hours of training over the course of the season, and then having, figuring out what is that seasonal amount times $12 an hour or whatever you pay someone. And that would be information that would be helpful in addition to knowing the interest in being part of the application. Is there anything else that you think would be?
No, we're all kind of, and I know it might drive a lot of people crazy because we're sort of flying by the seat of our pants here with the new program. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. So at least on the CFA end, I think we know which markets in the state are currently capable of taking SNAP. And that's probably a good starting place for us. But we also, are committed to working with other markets through our USDA Farmers Market Program. So I can see us sending out a letter to markets to see if they're interested. But I also say, as farmers markets who might be interested in this, or just generally speaking, letting CFA know. But for other folks, it may make sense that they and a group of other markets might want to put in their own application, right? I don't know what Lexington's inclinations or Louisville's inclinations, right? Those urban markets have multiple markets in them. Even Bowling Green has multiple markets, right? So it'll be up to them to decide what is best for them. But K-Card is here, and they're capable of helping those groups put in a proposal for it. Yes. Alita says yes.
It's all good.
So many of you have already been in contact with the point people for us on it, which is Aaron Shapiro and Marissa Christie, and those are our grant folks, and they would be the people who, if people want to put in an application, then they will help through the process and help you through the steps. But I can't emphasize enough, you have to contact them now, today, because there's so much pre-registration for a federal grant that has to happen, and it will take a few weeks for the government to recognize who you are. And so that has to happen now. So if that is the choice, then just make sure you're in contact with them, because they can be in touch with you and give you some idea of our checklist for this particular grant, and then what milestones you need to hit so that you're not sitting at your computer on December 15th and crying. And because it's 5:01 p.m. and the computer crashed and you weren't able to submit. So we want to avoid that. We've been there with people. So anyway, we are happy to help, but just help us by giving us as much notice as you can that you're serious about applying, and so that we can work through the process. And we do review applications at the bitter end too. So if you want us to take a look at stuff to make sure it meets eligibility and things, we can.
Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. If there aren't any other questions, I think does that cover the agenda?
Basically, it does. Any questions from folks at home? And then, so I remind everybody, I think most people registered for today, and that reason, one of the reasons we wanted to do that is to follow up with stuff. If you registered, you were also supplied a link to a Dropbox, and you may or may not have followed through on that. So there's in that Dropbox, there's information from today. In fact, this morning I dropped into it the actual RFP from the USDA for this. I think someone wanted to know what the counties for the Promise Zone and Strike Force. I can drop that information into that Dropbox for folks. And I think when I will be working with NOAA in the next couple of days to coming up with a strategy on what CFA's approach is going to be. And like I said, it's part of a bigger program. The Finney part is one piece. And yeah, it's a good question. Is it worth it? But anyway, and I will, having the contact list, be able to also reach out, but don't hesitate to reach out for me. So there is a question, how to contact for grant help. That sounds great. So go to that Dropbox, and K-Card's contact information will be up there. Yeah. Yeah, by Monday. I'm assuming end of business day on Monday. But and so again, if there's anybody, I'm assuming if you're on the webinar, then you've already gone through all that process and that registration. So again, go to that Dropbox and you can get that information. If you forgot how to get there, you can always go to CFA's website. I think right on their landing page there is today's event, how to register, re-register. You will get another confirmation and the link. Sorry to make it so complicated. We're trying to take advantage of technology to get as much information out there without generating wads of paper.
Great. Thanks. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you all. Oh, and we are recording this, so I will try to make that available too.